Hello, welcome back to another lesson. We are continuing with Amish. We looked at roles and statuses in Amish culture last lesson. This lesson we're going to examine the second two of the following. Now we did gender and roles and statuses. We're going to do three because, that's just how the online class rolls, above and beyond expectations. All day, every day. So, we're going to look at conflict and cooperation today in the Amish culture, and we're going to look at how that is similar or different to Western culture. So, highlight lesson 11, and we'll get started. Page 42. I'm excited. Are you guys excited? I'm excited. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. Woo-hoo. All right, here we go. Lesson 11, looking at conflict and cooperation in Amish culture and how that is similar or different to Western culture. So, I've broken this down. We're going to look at cooperation in Amish culture, and then we're going to look at cooperation in Western culture, and we're going to look at conflict in Amish culture, and then we're going to look at conflict in Western culture, and then we're going to do our little table. Alright? Sweet. Sounds good. So, cooperation in Amish culture. Again, make sure you're highlighting and annotating as we go. Amish society is built and based on cooperation. So, in order to be accepted into their society, you have to accept the ordnung, which we remember means excellent. You got that right. It means rules and order in German. And therefore there's a common set of values for everyone. So the idea is that if you're not cooperating, you're going to get shunned from that society. Everyone follows the rules and is on the same page essentially. So we looked at last lesson as well with gender roles and statuses. And we looked at the idea that the role that men play, and so one might be the community's work specialist, the other might be the agricultural farmer, the other guy might raise animals, the other guy might fix houses, the other guy might make leather. So they all cooperate together by trading goods and services to be able to sustain each of their own families, and therefore the community at large as well. So cooperation is key to their culture. In the community, people accept the authority of God, bishops, ministers, and deacons. So, again, that's cooperation. They're accepting their authority. They're accepting it as law. And if people aren't going to cooperate with that, that's when conflict comes. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But generally, the consensus is that people are going to cooperate by following those rules, laws, and expectations. Indeed, we can see cooperation here. This is a ritual in the Amish culture called barn raising. So they attempt to raise and build a barn in one single day, which is crazy. That would be very big, but the whole community comes together and does it and lends a hand to get the job done. So again, that's an example of cooperation. And because they solely rely on the community, remember they don't get any government financial support or backing or anything outside of that area. So it's really important that they are all cooperating. And they do this because they believe that God is pleased when people work together in harmony with nature. Again, part of the reason they don't have technology, that's not working in harmony with nature. So things like the soil, working with the weather, caring for animals and plants, they always live in rural communities and they cooperate with their environment. So their environmental footprint would be very, very little or next to none compared to, say, Western culture and ours. So again, that's showing cooperation not just with each other, but the environment as well. Amish people by nature are pacifists. So a pacifist, or to pacify, if you want to draw a little arrow below here, that means they don't believe in any kind of violence, and they avoid confrontation at all costs. Okay, so if you're a pacifist, you're always trying to maintain the peace, I guess, is a way you could say it. So they avoid, this doesn't mean it can't or doesn't happen, like obviously everyone's going to have forms of conflict, but they avoid it at all costs. So the way that they do that, again, is by following the rules very strictly. Everyone knows their role and status within society, and everyone's generally encouraged to believe the exact same thing to avoid any sort of conflict or violence there. And this is the barn raising thing I was just talking about. So in a nutshell, Amish culture, very cooperative society, again based on their ideologies that they all follow the same ordnung and order, which pertains that God and religion has created the rules that they work in and the conditions under which they live. So there you go. Now, cooperation in Western culture, I'll get you guys to look at that in your word bank. But there's a picture of the West. Ooh, there's a spider on my hat. Ugh. I'll get it later. I just broke it. Look, I just broke my hat. Can you see? That's alright. I'll get a local Amish expert to help me fix it. So, cooperation, Western culture, I'll get you guys to do that. We'll run through that on Friday. Now, looking at conflict in Amish culture, we've looked at cooperation. Now, conflict can be very different. That shouldn't be 1, 2, 3. That should be dot points. Oops. Another little typo there for your books. I can get this thing off. Sorry. So conflict in Amish culture. Now, most of the time, because they're very, very focused on cooperation and they're pacifists, they're not trying to make any conflict, although it still can happen. So our first example you've probably thought of already is the idea of shunning. So shunning, again, is where you are exiled from the community for either breaking the rules or not following their cultural beliefs. If they break their baptismal vows, so that idea that, again, baptism when they publicly acknowledge that they are going to follow the rules, essentially, and live a Christian life, if they break those rules, that's when the shunning happens. So obviously that creates a conflict in the culture for their values and beliefs, and that essentially is the main way that conflict occurs in Amish community, because their lifestyle and their foundation is built on those religious laws and ideas that as soon as they're broken or there's any conflict there, it will lead to a shunning or an exile. So there's example 1 of conflict in Amish culture. Another area where conflict can happen is around the aid of technology and the extent to which it's acceptable or not. Now, extent is a really important verb that we should know. A lot of the HSC questions will say, to what extent does blah, 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 blah. So extent means essentially how far, and a lot of the time you're making a judgment on the extent of something. So if you were drawing a little arrow, you could say make a judgment regarding how far something will go. So when we're looking at the extent to which someone would agree with something, it's the point of which they will. It's that how far along the line or are you willing to go to either break that rule or consider it normal. So if we go back up to here, for example, to what extent does the Amish agree with technology? It depends on where you're from. So some of them agree to it to the extent of washing machines, where almost every single one of them uses motorized washing machines. But the extent to which they believe in tractors for field work is very low. It's only 6% here, if that makes sense. So the extent to which you're seeing how far or how much of something. So again, that can lead to conflict, because you might have one Amish culture that's happy to use a flushing toilet, for example, and then another one that says that that's a sin. So the aid of technology is an area of conflict with Amish people and Amish culture, because you can also imagine that this isn't just a recent thing. Like, as technology developed, because this group's like 400 or 500 years old, at some point they all would have had to cave. Like, no one would have been using washing machines or lamps or chainsaws at some point, or toilets, but slowly over time they've changed, and obviously that would have created conflict along the way. So that would be a continuity in conflict with the Amish culture, the extent to which they should use technology. And then the last main area of conflict that can occur in Amish culture is around Rumspringer, and that period where adolescents, once they experience life outside of Amish culture for a few months or a few years or even a week or two, and they come back, they may be considered deviant or behave in a way that goes against traditional Amish values. So if they get back and they start, let's say they came to Australia and, you know, went to Pulse or Bayview or the OB or something, they were clubbing around, they were smoking, they were on their phone, swiping around on Tinder, they then started to drive a car to the next pub. If they go back to the Amish culture and talk about all those experiences, they might be shunned. Do you know what I mean? That could create a lot of conflict for their family. Their beliefs and values might change. They might come back and then start mucking up a bit more because they've had that outside exposure to a different way of life. And that can cause conflict in Amish culture to the point where they may decide not to come back. And you can see how that can cause conflict and change within the family and those dynamics, because they are often quite complex. So they're the three main areas that conflict occurs in the Amish culture. When they shun people for breaking the religious beliefs and laws, conflict around technology, and then conflict around Rumspringa. Now, in Western culture, I'll get you guys to do that on your own. You probably find that we're pretty similar in terms of conflict there, though. So what I want you to do now, similar to the last lesson, I don't want you to make a summary dot points of these. You don't have to do that today, because essentially you're going to do that here in this table. So similar to the last lesson, in the green column, which is there for you, up there, green column, you are writing any areas where Western culture is similar to the Amish culture in terms of conflict and cooperation. So I don't know, maybe you want to cut this table in half and have a little cooperation subheading and then have a conflict subheading, or if you just want to mash them all together, that's fine, whatever you think works best for you. So everything that's similar there, everything that's different here, and we'll go through and check that with each other on Friday. And that's it for lesson 11. Have a good one.